I want to read something to you before we begin our lesson this evening. Imagine a man. He's just started out in life. He has a beautiful wife and two adorable little children, with a third one on the way. His marriage has had its ups and downs. He and his wife always seem to work things out. He has a good job. They own a piece of land. He's building a nice house on it. He figures that it'll be done in a couple years. One day he comes home from work and he shows his wife a small sore that has developed on his hand. It's not too painful, but it does keep him from being able to work on the house. He takes it easy for a couple days, but the sore just keeps getting larger and larger, but it still doesn't hurt. After a few days, they both get a bit worried, and his wife persuades him to go see a person in town who knows about such things. This person isn't a doctor, but he's been trained and has some experience with skin infections and things of that sort. This man looks at it and he says, well, it's hard to determine what it might be. I have a couple of theories based on my experience, but I want to be sure. So I need you to stay here for a couple weeks so that we can observe the affected area. So that's what they do. For 2 weeks, the sore just continues to get bigger and bigger until it almost covers his whole hand. It becomes white around the edges. It doesn't cause much pain, but it sure looks horrible. At the end of 2 weeks, the man with the training says to the younger man, I figured out what you have. And I'm sorry to inform you that you have leprosy. Because of this, you're going to have to leave your wife and your children, your land, your home, your job, and go off to live with other lepers on the outside of town. Hearing this, the man's terrified. It's a sentence to death. And the process of dying by leprosy is worse than dying itself. In most cases, the outer body of the person just rots, literally to pieces, while the person continues to live. But this is not what terrifies the man. He's not afraid of dying. He's not afraid of the process leading up to it. What he's afraid most of is the complete separation and isolation that's about to begin. Although the physical symptoms of leprosy are bad, the mental and emotional damage that it causes is even worse. Lepers are required to keep as far away from all healthy, clean people as possible. Whenever someone drew near who did not have leprosy, the leper was supposed to shout, "Unclean, unclean." Lepers are never allowed to be near their loved ones again. This man's leprosy hadn't gone very far yet. Maybe he could just go home one last time. He desperately wanted to tell his loving wife goodbye. He wants to tell his children one last time that he loves them and that he will always be thinking of them. Let me just go home and tell them goodbye, he begs. Let me give my wife another last hug, last kiss. I'm sorry, says the man, you cannot ever go home. You can never hold your wife in your arms again. You cannot ever wrestle with your son again. You can never kiss your little girl goodnight again. If you see them and you touch them, they may get it themselves. If you love them, you will never get near them again. So the man goes off, alone, to rot, to die. This man truly lived a horrible life. His family would come and bring him food every day, but they couldn't get close. They'd leave it at a certain place on a rock, and when they withdrew, he would go pick it up and he'd eat. This is how he watched his children grow up, yet was never able to touch them. He watched his wife cry as she left the food, but he was never able to comfort her. After several years of this, he started wishing that they wouldn't come anymore. It wasn't that he didn't want to see them. It was more that he didn't want them to see him. He had lost an ear already, several of his fingers and toes. His face was horribly disfigured. His hair was falling out. And according to the Jewish law, his clothes were to be torn, his head shaved, covering upon his upper lip, and to always cry, "Unclean, unclean." And he knew he looked repulsive. And he didn't want his family to remember him this way. Some days he just wished that he would die. Then one day, something happened that this man and his family would never forget. Turn with me to Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5, and we just have a few short verses, verses 12 through 16. This account of this particular healing miracle is also found in Matthew chapter 8, 2 through 4, and Mark 1, 40 through 45. I'm going to go ahead and read this particular account in Luke. It's one of Jesus' miracles of physical healing. There are similar miracles. In Luke chapter 17, he heals 10 lepers. In Luke chapter 6, he heals a man with a withered hand. So this one is a single leper, a single man. So starting in verse 12, it happened when he was in a certain city that, behold, a man who was full of leprosy saw Jesus. And he fell on his face, and he implored him, saying, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Then he put out his hand, and he touched him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately the leprosy left him. In verse 14, he charged him to tell no one. He said, "But go and show yourself to the priests, and make an offering for your cleansing, as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded." However, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed by him of their infirmities. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. So looking at this account, I'd like to go through some things, but I wanted to show some photos that we looked at in class, a youth class. And these photos are just some samples of, brief samples of what leprosy looked like. But I wanted to note, we don't have, oh, here. Oh, we got to turn on. Well, while those are showing, I wanted to note let's start in verse 12. This man was full of leprosy. One of the things your versions might say was covered. Some say an advanced case. The Living Bible translation says that this leprosy ravaged his body. So it was not just, a hand. It wasn't just a foot. It wasn't just an arm. This disease had overtaken his entire body, which, kind of makes this particular miracle even greater, even of more magnitude than if Jesus were to heal this and that, and just a small part. There are different kinds of leprosy, but the most common, that is familiar is one that damages the nervous system, and really it affects over 5 million people. Every 2 minutes, someone is diagnosed with leprosy. The most cases have been found in India. They have 60% of the world's cases. They have over 1,000 colonies of lepers in India. As a result, leprosy simply causes you to not be able to feel anything, and most people think that when they lose fingers or toes or feet or hands, it's because of the disease, when actually it's because they weren't able to feel anything. And so they get into accidents, and as they try to carry out their daily routines, they will hurt themselves. They can't sense anything. So, when someone is blind, they can't see. When, someone's deaf, they can't hear. But when someone has leprosy, they can't feel. And so they will damage different parts of their body and lose certain parts of their body. That infected area of the body goes numb and eventually loses all sensitivity. Nerve damage can lead to dangerous loss of feelings. You can scroll through these, Russell. Loss of feeling. A person with leprosy that has nerve damage cannot feel pain with their hands, their legs, their feet, if they're cut, burned, or otherwise. The leper most often does not die from leprosy, but from damage that is done to their body because they have no feeling in their limbs. But one of the things that's notable about this particular case is that as others backed away from lepers, typically, Jesus draws near to him as he falls on his face and implores Jesus. And I like that. I'm using the New King James Version. I like that, the idea of imploring. And I don't know what your particular version might say. It could say begged. But the word imploring denotes earnesty. It denotes desperation. And so you can see when he says, that he's desperate and he's begging and he's imploring, you can tell in the words, if you are willing, you can make me clean. You can cure me. Being made clean, it was important. Not only was it important that he was cured, but that he was also able to go back into society. So he falls on his face and he begs and implores Jesus with the words, if you are willing. What do we note about if you are willing? What does that say about the leper when he asks Jesus, and just like, if you're willing? What does that say about him? What does that tell us about the mindset of the leper at this moment when he speaks to Jesus? His faith? His humbleness. That was one of the first things that came to my mind was his humbleness. If you are willing, you can make me clean. And knowing that Jesus had the ultimate power. Jesus had the ultimate decision, whether he would heal or not heal, whether he would overlook or whether he would stop and take note. But there's not a sense for this leper knowing everything. I mean, that's why I wanted to read the story and kind of, just get a background of what he might be going through and the things that he's thinking, where his mind is, where he had to be in a major state of depression just no hope. And he's still, if you, not demanding, not heal me, not can you heal me, but if you are willing, I know that you can make me clean. Verse 13. Jesus reached out and touched the man. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on Jesus reaching out and touching the man, the unclean man? He was unclean. You weren't supposed to touch anyone unclean. By law of Moses. But Jesus reaches out. Leviticus 5:3, never touch that which is unclean. Yet Jesus did. I think that's an interesting point and an obvious one, that he reached out and touched, but why did he do it? We've seen other miracles where Jesus didn't have to touch anyone. He just spoke it. Jesus didn't even have to be in the same vicinity. He could be miles away and heal. But why did he make a point to touch this leper? Any thoughts? I'm interested in your thoughts, what you think. What's that? Okay. I definitely think that just the contact from Jesus and this word, when he touched him, this word touched means a lot more than what our English word touched means today. There's a lot more involved. If you just look at Webster, it's bring a bodily part into contact with another in a physical sense. You reached out and touched somebody. We even use that phrase, communication. You reach out and touch someone. That little catchphrase. You're not even actually touching someone physically. But the Bible uses this word for touch, and it has much more of a dramatic definition. It has much more meaning. It's literally that Jesus took hold of him. He took hold of him. So maybe he put his arms around him. Maybe he touched his shoulders. Maybe he embraced him. But it was something more than just touching him, just ever so slightly. What else? What other reasons would Jesus do that when he didn't have to? I like that, most definitely showing compassion and concern and love and care. That's what Jesus was doing. Knowing that, hey, you might be isolated from society and your family and the city, but you're not isolated to me, and I'm willing. Was Jesus just unaware of what he was doing? Any other thoughts? Quick. Well, and don't you know that others had to possibly see this interaction? And to see that, Jesus wasn't afraid to interact. And not only interact, which nobody did, but to have physical contact with him. For sure. And there's no wrong answer. I'm not, there's not a no, that's not it. And I think all of these are great and true. But yeah, most definitely, he did not fear. He would not have feared any disease and getting close to anyone. And so those onlookers and whatever, shows the true compassion that Jesus had. We have a song in our songbook. Anybody have an idea? You get 10 points if you get the right answer. And it's titled something that would apply here. Anybody know the title of that song that I'm thinking about? The what? The Great Physician. Yeah. It's the first thing that came. The Great Physician now is here. I've come. The sympathizing Jesus. The one that has compassion, care, and concern, and is not afraid, and wants to show others that I'm not afraid. And that the power that I have is much greater. And Jesus tends to do the opposite of what is expected, what is traditional. Jesus was probably the worst at marketing because he pretty much told you how it was. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't try to dress it up. He didn't try to make it look different. He just said it, and he did it. And he wasn't afraid of anybody and wasn't concerned about who saw him, i.e. his healings on the Sabbath. And those things were of no concern to him. And so he did draw near to people like that. We talked about Sunday morning in class, just the fact that the whole Gospel of Luke is geared toward the less fortunate, the poor, the hurting, those that need help. And that's who Jesus came to heal. And I partner with you on all of these answers. And those are the kind of answers that I would give. But one thing that I learned about leprosy is it's not contagious by touch. It's mouth, saliva, and nose, similar to a lot of infections that we have today, hence the law of covering. Let's cover so that we don't spread disease to each other. And so therefore, it wouldn't have been, probably people considered it, bad to touch. Why would you touch a leper? But it's not contagious by touch. You can't touch someone and pass it along. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, think about the man, what he'd been through, like you said, the isolation and the loneliness. I can't imagine what it would be like to live life like that, with those restrictions and limitations and the loneliness and depression that would have went along with that. And Jesus was showing them. And showing the man that, he was not afraid of that. Like the healing was probably wonderful, but I'm thinking he needed a little love too, right? Yeah. So he touches them, and Jesus replies that, he is willing, and tells them to be cleansed. And one of the things that we've made mention of throughout our study of miracles is the fact that his healing was immediate. The leprosy immediately left him. There wasn't a delay. There wasn't partial healing. There wasn't, come back in a couple of weeks, and I'll see you again. It was immediate. It was complete. And that's the way Jesus healed. So verse 14, he charged him to tell no one. But he says to go and show yourself to the priest. Make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. And I'm interested too on some feedback on Jesus basically ignored the first Mosaic law of touching something unclean. But then he tells the leper to go to the priest, which is something that you needed to do, and we'll look at that. Make an offering for your cleansing, and then as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. So now he's telling the leper to go do something that was a law. And I thought it interesting as a testimony to them as Moses commanded. Who is the them? Who's he talking about there? The idea is as a testimony to them. Any thoughts, any ideas? I mean, there's a lot of maybes. Maybe it was the crowd, the people, society, whatever. What's interesting is I don't know if it's the priest, because he says to go show yourself to the priest as a testimony to them. So I don't know if he's referring to the priest in that situation or not, or if he's wanting him to teach in his actions what he does, the crowd and the people and those that were around.
Tim, they were by law required after they were healed to go to the priest to show themselves, and the priests were supposed to examine them,
Right.
and make sure that the leprosy was actually gone. So that's what they were doing.
Let's look at, I wanted to look over at Leviticus 14. Just because that whole cleansing, and I'm not going to read it all, but the detail of what they were supposed to do once they were, and when I taught this the first time in class, one of my 7th graders kind of posed a question that threw me off a little bit. Because I was under the assumption that you could not be cured from leprosy. Once you had it, and it was a death sentence. And so when we read this passage in Leviticus, the Lord spoke to Moses in Leviticus 14. He says, "This shall be the law of the leper for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest. And the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest will examine him. And indeed, if the leprosy is healed in the leper, then the priest will command to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 living and clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop." So it is a curable. You can be cured of leprosy, and they do that today. There are treatments today, but so she's like, why? If it's not curable, why would they go to the priest after they had been cured to go through all of this sacrificial kind of cleansing ritual? But all these things, 2 living clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. And the priest shall command that one of the birds be killed in the cistern vessel over running water. And as for the living bird, he shall take it, the cedar wood and the scarlet and the hyssop, and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird loose in the field, in the open field. And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off his hair, and wash himself in water, that he may be clean. And after he shall come into the camp, he'll stay outside of his tent for 7 days. But on the 7th day, he shall shave all the hair on his head, and his beard, and his eyebrows, and all of his hair shall be shaved off. And he shall wash his clothes, and wash his body in water, and he shall be clean. And then on the 8th day, he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, 1 ewe lamb in the first year without blemish, 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with the oil and the grain offering, and the 1 log and the oil. I mean, all this stuff. And you keep on going, on down and on down. All these things that they had to do to be cleansed and to be able to be pronounced clean again, so that they could re-enter the city, and they could again go home and be with their families. It's quite the Jesus decides. I think Jesus decides the things that are important. So he's able to go, he's going through the ritual to be cleansed. So Jesus tells him to tell no one. To tell no one. So what did the leper do? Did the leper disobey Jesus? Verse 15, the report went around concerning him all the more. I don't know. Don't know if the leper disobeyed Jesus or if there were people that saw everything that happened. But we know that the report went around concerning all that had happened, which definitely, when you think about miracles and the purpose and the reason for miracles to confirm the message and to confirm the messenger, that verse 15 is a true representation of what happened people found out. And when Jesus performed a miracle, the report went around concerning everything that he did. Great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed by him of their infirmities. And then finally, Jesus withdrew from everyone and went into the wilderness and prayed. Some things about the leper. What can we say about the leper from this experience? If we were going to make a list of 5 things that were characteristic of this leper, what would we say? He had faith. Somebody already said it. One of them was his humility in his request. If you are willing, you can make me clean. So his humility, his faithfulness, he believed it was possible. His meekness in presenting himself to the Lord, and he fell on his face and begged him and implored him. What else about the leper? Anything else that we know about this or can know about this man from his experience? He was what? He was what? Because of his situation and because of what he had been through and his isolation and all of the things that were plaguing him, not only just the disease, but the depression and the loneliness and the hurt and the mental and emotional side of it. How would you view this man? Desperate. Absolutely. He was submissive. He was desperate. He was reverent. He didn't have anything that was owed him. He had no rights as a leper. He didn't issue any ultimatums. He didn't command or suggest. He was very humble in everything. Part of spreading the word. So how do we relate this miracle, this account, to today? What does leprosy represent? Sin. And the pictures that we viewed that were external in nature, and you could see the quote grotesqueness and deformity and how every characteristic of leprosy can be applied to sinful nature, can be applied to our sin, and how and what that does to our lives. Think about a leper, and then think about someone who's lost in sin, someone who is just rejected the Lord, And almost all these things you can apply to this particular disease. The way it looks on the outside is the way it looks on the inside. And we might be able to cover it up. And we might, lepers couldn't cover it up. Lepers couldn't hide it. They couldn't pretend that it didn't exist. And we can do that with sin. We can hide it. We can pretend. We can make excuses. We can do a lot of things that the lepers couldn't. Yeah. If you know someone, and I'm still relating this to sin, but if you know someone, and a lot of times we don't, because we don't know what people are necessarily going through, but when you do, how do they look? How do they appear? I mean, I'm sure some can appear like there's nothing wrong. But when you are around people that know that they've been caught up in something and they shouldn't, and it eats at them, especially when they know better, especially erring Christians and those that know better, and they know that a certain lifestyle or a certain activity or frequenting this or that, is not what I should be doing in a relationship that I don't need to be in. And you continue to do that, it eats away at you. It destroys you. And you don't look very good. You don't look very good on the outside. You look like there's something wrong. Just like these lepers, you knew. I mean, you knew it was obvious. And what sin, looks like on the inside is hard. It's difficult sometimes. It can destroy us. It can make us insensitive. It can make us calloused. It can eat away at our conscience. All these things that share some of the same characteristics as this disease that shows itself on the external part of a person. We're given all kinds of warnings. I like Romans in Romans 6, chapter 6, verses 12 and 14, talks about not letting sin reign or take hold of your mortal body. And not to let it have dominion over you. And I think about those kinds of words, taking hold and having dominion and reigning over you, as this leprosy, this sin, this disease that can, you think about the outcomes and the external outcomes of leprosy, they're the same. They're the same with sin. It will destroy you. It will isolate you and alienate you, and you can lose your family. There's a lot of things that can happen. Let's bow together. Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this time that we have in the middle of the week to be together. Father, as we reflect on the end of a year and the beginning of another, may we look for ways that we can glorify you and do the things that you would have us to do that would interest those in following you. And Father, we're mindful of those that can't be with us and that are ill and struggling with their health and have treatments upcoming. And we just pray that you give them a measure of strength and comfort and peace as they go through this. Help us to be an encouragement to them as well and to support them in all ways that we can. Father, help us to look to you and to draw near to you and doing the things that you have us to do, rather than isolating ourselves and being outcast from those that we need to be around that can influence us for good. Father, thank you for your Son, the sacrifice that was made and all that he's done. It's through his name we pray.